An important thing to remember about ordinary time is that most weeks the gospel picks up shortly after last week's gospel left off. So to make the most of the readings, we really need to remember what we've heard in the immediately previous weeks. Last week, Jesus sent his disciples out with the mission to share Christ's message and to perform miracles themselves. And today the disciples have returned home, and the passage I just read is about how Jesus guides the disciples after the success of their mission. Jesus' number one goal for them is to lead them on a retreat. To quote the gospel, "Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." And the question I have is, why? You'd think that after such a great success, the right thing to do would be to send them out again to do some more ministry. Keep the ball rolling, build on the success. Why do we need a retreat for some sort of correction, if you will? But no, Jesus says it's time for a retreat. Why? I'd like to propose that our first reading may give us a healthy clue. In times past, God had blessed Israel. He had led them into battle, gifted them with prophets, set up just leaders to rule them. But every time God blessed them, the Israelites found a way to mess it up. And too often, it was precisely the same leaders who God had blessed who were responsible for going astray. And so our first reading from the prophet Jeremiah, God tells the Israelites, "Woe to the shepherds who mislead and scatter the flock." And he rebukes them, saying, "You have not cared for them." So what I'd like to propose is that Jesus has decided a new strategy is in order to protect his leaders. He says, if the leaders are going to continue to lead well, God must reinforce the lessons they need to learn and the rules they need to abide by. And so after their great missionary success, Jesus wants to take them away to get their head right, to remind them of what they're trying to accomplish. There is something corrupt deep inside all of us. We are very tempted to ignore one of the core truths of life, that with every privilege comes responsibility. And thus, the greater the privilege, the more we should expect a great matching responsibility. By way of example, it is a great privilege that I am allowed to stand here and give this homily. But the instant I forget that this privilege comes with a matching responsibility, we are all in big trouble. Now, my trouble will come from the bishop with a scathing letter and a disciplinary action. But you are in trouble as well, because you have put your trust in me to help guide your faith. And if I abuse that trust, it could harm at least some of you greatly. And that is why the first reading says to me, "Woe to me if I lead you astray." And so my reaction to this is I have to say it is extremely important that I dedicate myself to prayer and to the Eucharist and to the confessional when I'm not living up to my responsibilities. And I must do everything in my power to keep my head right. I cannot forget the profound responsibility that I have. Everyone here has been given some privilege. Sure, it might not be here at the church. Perhaps it's at home. Perhaps it's at work. Or maybe you're the leader in a club or organization. Or maybe it is even just that God has blessed you financially. I think we should spend some time today reflecting on what the privileges we have are. In fact, I think we should write them down, spend some thorough time listing them out, because additional ones will come to us as we start writing. And the reason we need to write them down is I think once we have listed all of our privileges, we need to go through it item by item and ask ourselves, what are the responsibilities that come with this privilege? And then finally, we need to ask ourselves, am I living up to that responsibility? To use an example, many of us have been financially blessed. And for those of us who have been, we have an obligation to use that money for more than our own personal pleasure. Now, I fully understand that there are plenty of people, including in this room, who are currently financially struggling, and that paying the rent and putting food on the table is a daily challenge. And if that's your situation, I earnestly say to you, my prayers and sympathies are with you. But for many of the rest of us, we are richly financially blessed. And that blessing comes with an obligation that we use our wealth to make the world a better place. And we must ask ourselves, how am I called to use my wealth for good? And then we have to ask ourselves the question of, are we actually doing that? But it doesn't matter whether it is wealth, or being a supervisor at work, or a president, or of a club or something, or a mentor to a friend, or a minister like the lector here at church, or many of the myriad of ways we are privileged. Each and every single one of them comes with a responsibility. And we must all come to terms with the very real possibility that we are abusing the privileges we have by not taking seriously the corresponding responsibilities. Let me say that again. We have to come to terms with the very real possibility that we are abusing the privileges that we have been given by not taking seriously the corresponding responsibilities. And so I think with today's reading, it is the perfect day for us to reflect on that possibility and to pray for guidance and strength to rise above our weaknesses. I want to finish by focusing on what happens at the end of today's gospel passage. Do the disciples actually end up going on this planned retreat? No, they don't. Before they can, the vast crowds catch up with them, and Jesus has pity on them. And he puts aside his important plans for a retreat, and he ministers to the crowd instead. And I think the exclamation point that puts on my homily today is that Jesus is telling us, when it comes to our privileges and our corresponding responsibilities, it is the responsibilities that must come first.